She had been living in that house for 22 years before she realized none of it belonged to her. Not the home, not the car, not even the life she thought she had built. Every morning looked the same. Coffee for two, a quiet house, and a husband who always said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." And over time, she stopped asking questions because nothing felt wrong. That was the most dangerous part. She wasn't unhappy. She was comfortable. And comfort has a way of disguising itself as safety, right up until the moment it isn't. Elena Vasquez was 27 years old when she met David Carter at a mutual friend's dinner party in Atlanta, Georgia. She was working at the time, a junior coordinator at an event planning company. Nothing glamorous, but it was hers. Her paycheck, her apartment, her name on a lease. She wore a red dress that night. She would remember that dress for the rest of her life, not because it was special, but because it was the last time she walked into a room as someone who belonged entirely to herself. David was 12 years older, confident in the way that men with money often are, not loud about it, just settled, like the world had already agreed to accommodate him, and he had simply stopped noticing. He was handsome in a forgettable way. Brown eyes, good shoes, the kind of laugh that made you feel chosen when it was directed at you. He asked her about her job. He listened, really listened, she thought, when she talked about her dreams of one day owning her own event business. He said, "A woman with a vision. That's rare." She thought that was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. They dated for 2 years. He was generous. He paid for everything, dinners, trips, weekends away, and when she offered to split, he would wave her off. "Let me do this," he'd say. "I want to." And she let him, because who wouldn't? They married in the spring. A beautiful ceremony in Savannah with Spanish moss hanging from the trees and a reception that people still talked about years later. Elena glowed. Not with the artificial brightness of a woman performing for an audience, but with the real, warm light of someone who genuinely believes she has arrived somewhere good. The first year was mostly wonderful. The second year was when things started to shift, so quietly that Elena didn't even hear it happening. David had strong opinions about how a household should run. He believed, genuinely believed, he said, that financial matters caused unnecessary stress for both people when discussed openly. "Why do you need to track the mortgage?" he'd ask when she asked to see statements. "That's handled. That's my job. Your job is to make this home what it is." And Elena would look around at the beautiful house, the hardwood floors, the garden she tended, the kitchen she loved, and think, yes, he's right. This is handled. I'm lucky. Over time, her name disappeared from things. Not dramatically, not overnight. It happened the way fog rolls in, slowly, silently, and by the time you notice it, you can no longer see the shore. The joint account became his account, with her as a secondary user. The house was refinanced under his name alone, just for the interest rate, he said. Your credit score pulled it down a bit. The investments? She didn't even know they existed until later. And Elena? Elena cooked. She kept the house immaculate. She raised their 2 children, a boy and a girl, with fierce love. She entertained David's business contacts with grace and warmth. She showed up to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every neighborhood association meeting. She was excellent at being a wife. She had simply stopped being a person. And the most heartbreaking thing, the thing that will stay with you long after this video ends, is that Elena didn't know it. She thought she was happy. She thought this was what marriage looked like when it worked. She thought the absence of conflict meant the presence of love. She was wrong. But she wouldn't find that out for 22 years. It was an ordinary Tuesday in October, the kind of day that doesn't warn you. No dramatic weather, no sense that the ground beneath you is about to open. Just Tuesday. Cool air, the smell of fallen leaves. Elena had woken early, as she always did, and made coffee, the good kind, with the pour-over kettle David had bought her for her 15th anniversary. She'd set his cup on the counter at the exact temperature he liked. She'd ironed the shirt he'd left on the chair the night before. He came downstairs at 7:15, kissed her on the cheek, said he had a long day ahead. She handed him his coffee. He took it without looking at her. "I'll see you tonight." The door closed. She never saw him again. The first call came at 2 in the afternoon. Unknown number. Elena almost didn't answer. She assumed it was a spam call, the kind that tells you your car's extended warranty is about to expire. But something made her pick up. Mrs. Carter, this is Jennifer Cole calling from First National Bank. I'm calling regarding your account. There seems to be an issue we need to make you aware of. Elena frowned. My account? What kind of issue? There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that the woman on the other end clearly uses when she has to deliver news she wishes someone else was delivering. Ma'am, all joint accounts associated with your name and your husband's name were closed approximately 3 weeks ago. The funds were transferred to a new sole account in your husband's name only. I'm calling because there's a pending direct deposit in your name from a vendor that we can no longer process. Elena stood very still in the middle of her kitchen. The coffee maker was still dripping. The neighbor's dog was barking somewhere outside. Everything was exactly as it had been 30 seconds ago, and nothing was. 3 weeks ago? She said. Yes, ma'am. Without my signature? The accounts were structured in a way that allowed sole authorization by your husband. You were listed as a secondary user on most of them, not a joint owner. Elena sat down on the kitchen floor, not because she fainted, not because she was weak. She sat down because her legs simply decided they were done holding her up. She called David's phone. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She texted, she emailed, she called his office, and a woman she had never spoken to told her that Mr. Carter had tendered his resignation 2 weeks prior and cleared out his office. 2 weeks prior. While Elena had been making his coffee, while he had been ironing his shirts, while she had been tending her garden and cooking Sunday dinners, and genuinely believing, that she was living inside a life that belonged to her. He had already been leaving. By nightfall, Elena had made calls she didn't know she had the nerve to make. The mortgage company confirmed the house was held solely in David's name. He had refinanced it 8 years ago. Elena had signed something. She vaguely remembered a stack of paperwork at a lawyer's office, something about just getting a better rate. And in that stack of paperwork, she had unknowingly signed away her ownership claim. The car? Registered to his LLC. The investment portfolio she didn't know existed? His. The credit cards in her wallet? Authorized user accounts, not primary accounts. He had closed those too. Elena Carter, after 22 years of marriage, had a purse full of canceled cards, a house she didn't own, and $47 in a personal checking account she had forgotten she even had. She was 51 years old. She had not worked in 19 years. She had no credit history in her own name. She had no savings. She had no plan. And the man who had built this elaborate, beautiful, suffocating life around her was simply gone. No note on the counter, no explanation, no argument that had escalated too far, no dramatic scene. Just gone. That night, Elena did not cry. She sat in the dark kitchen of the house that was not hers, and she was so deep inside the shock that the tears could not find their way out. She just sat and breathed and sat. There is a kind of pain that is too big to be witnessed. Elena knew this instinctively. She did not call her sister that first night. She did not reach for her phone and dial her closest friend, Patricia, the woman she had known for 30 years. She said nothing, because some betrayals carry a shame that has nothing to do with what you did wrong and everything to do with what others might think you should have seen. How do you tell someone that your husband of 22 years has vanished and taken everything with him? How do you say those words without hearing, underneath every sympathetic response, the unspoken question, how did you not know? The first week was the worst. Elena moved through the house like a ghost in someone else's life. She watered her plants, she did the laundry, she made a meal she did not eat. She answered the children's texts. Her son, Marcus, was in Portland, her daughter Simone in London, with brief, cheerful lies. Everything's fine. Your father is traveling. Give me a call this weekend. She needed time to figure out what the truth even was before she could begin to tell it. On day 4, she allowed herself to cry. Not the delicate, cinematic crying that happens in movies where women look beautifully broken and a strong hand finds their shoulder. The ugly kind. The kind that happens on a bathroom floor at 3 in the morning when you realize that the person you trusted most in the world was playing a game you didn't even know you were in. She cried until she was empty, and then she washed her face, looked at herself in the mirror for a long time, and went to bed. On day 7, she found the letter. She had been going through David's closet, not looking for it, just looking, the way you look through dead people's things when you are trying to understand who they were. She was moving aside a stack of old shoeboxes when she saw an envelope tucked behind them, pushed against the back wall of the shelf. Her name was on the front, written by David's careful, precise handwriting. She sat on the edge of the bed and held it for a long time. Then she opened it. 3 lines. That was all he had given 22 years of her life. Elena, I never thought you could survive without me. I built this life because I knew you needed someone to build it for you. Maybe now you'll finally learn what you're made of. D. She read it once, then again, then a third time slowly, as if each word needed to be weighed and examined before she could be sure she understood it. And then something happened inside Elena Carter that she would later describe in an interview years from now as the moment her life actually began. She got angry. Not the hot, screaming kind of anger that burns itself out in minutes. The slow, deep, cold kind. The kind that does not make noise. The kind that moves. He never thought she could survive 22 years of her life, and the final word he gave her was a condescending dare. He did not leave her a settlement, did not file for divorce, did not sit across from her at a table and have the courage to end the marriage the way adults do. He simply removed himself and everything with him, certain that she would collapse. Elena folded the letter, put it in her pocket, and decided he was wrong. She called Patricia the next morning, told her everything. There was a long silence on the line, and then Patricia said, "I'm coming over." "No," Elena said. "I need to do something first. I'll call you after." Elena dressed carefully that morning, not dramatically, not in armor, not in red, just carefully. The navy blazer she had not worn in years, the good earrings, lipstick because lipstick is a small act of insistence, and Elena needed to insist on something. She drove herself downtown, to the bank. She had $47, and she was going to do the only thing she could think of doing. She was going to start. The loan officer was young, younger than her son, she thought. He had a lanyard with too many key cards on it and the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone still learning the job was harder than the training suggested. He looked at her paperwork for a long time. Then he looked at her. "Mrs. Carter, I have to be honest with you. Your credit profile is very thin. You have almost no independent credit history, no income verification for 19 years, no collateral. This is a challenging application." "I understand," Elena said, "but I'm not asking for a lot. What is the purpose of the loan?" Elena was quiet for a moment. She had practiced this part on the way over to the bank. "I know how to cook," she said. "Not casually, not as a hobby. I have spent 20 years mastering recipes that I have never been paid for. I have fed hundreds of people at dinner parties, charity events, family gatherings. Every single person who has eaten at my table has asked me how I do it. I want to open a food truck, a small one. I am not asking you to believe I will be the next great American restaurateur. I am asking you for enough money to test whether I can be one." The loan officer looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you have a business plan?" She said, "I'm writing it. I'll have it to you by Thursday." She wrote it Tuesday night and all day Wednesday. She had never written a business plan in her life. She sat at the kitchen table, the kitchen in the house she didn't own, with her laptop and a cup of tea and typed until her eyes burned. She read articles, she watched videos, she called Patricia, who ran a small accounting firm, and asked her to review the numbers. Thursday, she was back at the bank. The loan officer read it, asked a few questions, made some notes. A week later, they called her. $12,000.
That was what they approved. Not life-changing money, not start a restaurant money, barely start a food truck money. It was the most important $12,000 she would ever hold.
The truck was not glamorous. Elena found it through a classified ad, a retired caterer in Decatur who was selling his setup because his knees had decided the kitchen was no longer their concern. It was older. The paint was fading on one side, a dull cream that had once been white. The serving window stuck if you didn't lift and push at the same time. The generator was louder than it should have been. Elena paid $5,000 for it. Use the rest to stock the kitchen, get the permits, pay for the commissary license, and print a small run of menus. She chose a corner spot on Edgewood Avenue. Not the best corner, not the worst. Enough foot traffic to give her a chance. The first week, she made $412. After expenses, she cleared about $60. She sat in the truck at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, counting it out, and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Then she put the money in her apron pocket, cleaned the griddle until it shone, and went home. The second week was a little better. Not because she got lucky, because she changed things. She had noticed which dishes moved and which sat. The soup, a slow-cooked black bean and smoked ham with herbs she grew herself, that was the one. She watched people close their eyes when they tasted it. She watched them come back. So she narrowed the menu, focused, put everything she had into 4 dishes done perfectly rather than 12 done well. She also started talking to people. This was harder than the cooking. Elena was not a naturally shy woman, but she had spent 2 decades in a life that did not require her to be seen. She had been David's wife, Marcus and Simone's mother, the hostess at the dinner party, always the person facilitating other people's comfort, rarely the center of anything. Now she had to stand in a serving window and say, "Hi, my name is Elena. Here is what I made today. I think you're going to love it." Some days it felt ridiculous. Some days she went home and cried from sheer exhaustion. The exhaustion of building something new from scratch when you are 51 years old and your knees ache and the generator is too loud and you can't remember the last time you slept properly. But the food never let her down. There's something that happens when a person cooks for a place of genuine understanding, not just technical skill. You can teach technique, but the understanding that people are hungry for more than nutrition, that a bowl of soup on a cold day is also permission to slow down, that a meal prepared with care is also a form of being seen. Elena had fed people her whole life. She knew this truth in her bones. And the people who found her truck, they felt it. By the end of 3 months, there were lines on Saturday mornings. Not enormous lines, but real ones. People who came back. People who brought friends. People who said, "You have to try this. I don't know how to explain it. Just go." A food blogger from a local Atlanta publication stopped by on a Wednesday, not because she had been tipped off, just because she was hungry and the truck was there. She wrote a post that weekend. "I wasn't planning to write about a food truck today, but then I had the soup." Elena read that post at midnight, in bed, on her phone. She read it 3 times, and then she turned off the light, and for the first time in months, she slept through till morning. The divorce proceedings were brutal. David was eventually located in Miami, where he had started a new life with a woman 15 years his junior. He had been methodical in his financial planning. A family law attorney who reviewed Elena's case told her that what David had done was not illegal in a criminal sense, but had been executed with extraordinary care. He had been planning this for years, the attorney said. Let that sit for a moment. While Elena had been tending her garden and raising his children and building his home and feeding his colleagues at dinner parties and believing she was safe, he had been planning this for years. Elena fought in the divorce. She did not have money for a high-powered attorney. She found a legal aid clinic that took her case. She documented everything. She showed up to every proceeding.
What she ultimately received was not half of what the marriage had been worth, not even close. But she received a settlement that, combined with what the truck was beginning to generate, gave her something she had not had in 2 decades. Options. Her children's reactions were complicated and worth telling honestly. Marcus, her son, was furious at his father and, in his initial shock, briefly and wrongly, at Elena for not seeing it. They had a hard conversation, a real one, and in the end he drove down from Portland and helped her repaint the truck. Simone, in London, went silent for 2 weeks, then called at midnight and talked for 3 hours. She flew home for Christmas. She sat in the truck on a cold December Saturday and watched her mother work. And when the last customer of the day was served and Elena was cleaning down the griddle, she said, "Mom, I had no idea you were this person." Elena laughed. "Neither did I," she said. There were nights, many nights, spread out across that first year and into the second, when Elena sat alone in the empty truck after closing and felt the weight of it all. Not self-pity, she was done with self-pity fairly early, but grief, real grief, for the life she had believed she was living, for the years that had gone, for the woman she might have been if things had been different. She started keeping a journal, not to process trauma, though it did that too, but because she wanted to remember this version of herself, the one who was scared and tired and building something anyway. She had a feeling she might need to remember her one day. She was right. 5 years after Elena opened that food truck on Edgewood Avenue, she signed a lease on a small restaurant space in Inman Park. It had exposed brick walls and 14 tables and a kitchen that was half the size she needed and everything she wanted. She called it Elena's Kitchen. The same name, carried over. She was not sentimental about much, but she was sentimental about this. About the line of continuity between the woman who had stood in a secondhand truck serving soup to strangers and the woman who was now signing a commercial lease on her own restaurant. Same woman, bigger table. The opening night was a Tuesday. Elena had chosen that deliberately. 14 tables, 60 covers. A menu that was not trying to be everything, just trying to be honest. Southern food with the kind of depth that only comes from years of cooking for the people you love most. She had a small team now, a sous chef named Duane, who had been cooking since he was 16 and had a palate like a tuning fork, and a front-of-house manager named Yolanda, who ran the dining room with the effortless authority of someone who has been reading rooms her whole life. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution sent a reviewer in the 3rd week. He ordered 6 dishes, sat for 2 hours, took notes the whole time. His review ran the following Sunday. There are restaurants that make you feel fed, and there are restaurants that make you feel found. Elena's Kitchen is the second kind. By month 4, they had a wait list on weekends. By the end of year 1, they had their first James Beard nomination. Not a win, but a nomination, which in the restaurant world is its own kind of arrival. Elena read that notification on her phone, standing in the walk-in cooler. She texted Simone. Then she put her phone back in her pocket and went back to prepping the evening service. Because the thing about building a real life, not a performed one, not a borrowed one, but a real one, is that you do not pause to be amazed by it. You just keep cooking.
She never had a grand vision. This is important. Elena was not the kind of woman who sat in her food truck dreaming of empire. She was the kind of woman who focused on the next thing in front of her and did it as well as she possibly could. The restaurant was not the plan. It was the next right step. What came after the restaurant was not the plan either. 3 years after opening Elena's Kitchen, she was approached by a publisher who had heard about her story. Not the restaurant critic story, not the James Beard story, but the real one, the food truck story, the $47 story. They wanted a cookbook. Elena took 6 months to say yes. She wasn't sure she wanted to put her story in a book. She wasn't sure she wanted people consuming her pain alongside her recipes. But when she finally sat down to think about what the book would really be, she understood it differently. It was not going to be a book about what happened to her. It was going to be a book about what she made. The cookbook was called Start With What You Know. It had a dark green cover and a photograph of two hands cupped around a bowl of steaming soup. Her hands, her soup. It debuted at number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list. She opened a second location in Charlotte the following year, then a catering division. Then, because she could not stop teaching, could not stop wanting to pass on what she knew, a culinary fellowship program for women over 40 who were rebuilding their lives. She called it the table, because that was the thing she had always believed in most. The table. The place where food becomes belonging. The place where strangers become known to each other. The place where you are, at least for this hour, fed and witnessed and safe. Within 3 years, the table had trained over 200 women. Women who had come out of divorce, out of incarceration, out of addiction, out of the particular poverty of having spent decades in someone else's vision of who you should be. Women who showed up not knowing what they could make. Women who left knowing they could make a lot. 10 years after the Tuesday that ended her old life, the restaurant on Edgewood, expanded now, twice the original size, was dark and quiet. Service had ended an hour ago. Dwayne and the kitchen team had gone home. Yolanda had locked the front door. Elena stayed. She did this sometimes. Stayed after everyone left, alone in the dining room. It was not nostalgia. It was something more deliberate. She liked to witness the space she had made. She liked to feel it. She walked between the tables, white tablecloths slightly disarranged from service, candles burned down, the smell of good food still hanging in the air, the specific, warm, layered smell of a kitchen that has worked hard. She sat down at the corner table, the one near the window that looked out onto the street. She thought about David, not with anger, not with longing, with something more like curiosity, the way you might think about a chapter of a book you finished a long time ago. You remember how it felt to read it, but you are so far past it now that it belongs to a different you. He had remarried. She knew this from Marcus, who had told her, neutrally, without drama. She had wished him, if not well, then at least away. That was enough. She thought about the letter. 3 lines. The letter she had kept, though she would not have been able to explain why, in the back of her journal. I never thought you could survive without me. She looked around at the room she had built with her own money, her own labor, her own sleepless nights and aching hands and stubborn, furious, quiet insistence. Every chair, hers. Every wall, hers. Every recipe on that menu, hers. Her name above the door, not borrowed, not shared by default, not granted. Earned. She smiled. Not for the room, not for the story, not for any camera. Just for herself. Because she had survived without him. She had survived without him so thoroughly, so completely, so beyond the small ceiling he had imagined for her, that the word survived hardly seemed to fit anymore. She had not survived. She had built. She turned off the lights, locked the door behind her, and walked to her car, paid for in full, in the October night. Elena's story is extreme. The disappearance, the total financial erasure, those are not everyday events. Most people who watch this will never face what she faced. But the quieter version of her story, that is everywhere. The woman who let go of her dreams one small compromise at a time, so gradually she cannot even pinpoint when it happened. The person whose name is not on anything, not out of malice, just out of habit and convenience and the daily drift of not paying attention. The individual who has not thought about their own future independently in so long that they are no longer sure they know how. That is not a dramatic story, but it is happening right now in homes across this country and across this world to people who are perfectly decent and reasonably loved and absolutely invisible to themselves. I am here to do what Elena's story did for me when I first heard it. Wake you up. Know what is in your name. Know what accounts exist and what your access to them is. Know what skills you have that belong to you alone, that no circumstance can take from you because they live in your hands and your mind. Have a conversation, a real one, not a defensive one, with your partner about finances, about ownership, about what happens if. Not because you don't trust them, but because love does not require financial invisibility, and because the one thing Elena learned, the hard, expensive, irreversible way, is that safety is not the same as security. Safety is someone else making sure you're comfortable. Security is knowing that if everything changed tomorrow, you would still be standing. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, if it stirred something in you that you recognize, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and tell me, what skill do you have that belongs to you alone? And subscribe, because more stories like this one are coming. More stories about people who started over, who built from nothing, who refused to be what someone else decided they were. See you next time.